My friends, when we speak of the mother, we do not speak merely of the woman who carried us, nor of the face that once hovered above our cradle. We speak of a psychic field, a primordial energy, a presence woven into the very architecture of the soul. The mother is not only a person, she is an archetype, an ancient pattern of life that echoes through every human heart, shaping instinct, emotion, and destiny. And when this archetypal field is wounded, when its shadow infiltrates the psyche of the empath, something profound happens. Emotional life becomes a labyrinth, built on echoes of unmet needs, inherited silences, and buried longing. Tonight, I want you to listen not only with the ears of the mind, but with the ears of the unconscious, for the healing of the mother shadow is not an intellectual event. It is a return, a descent, a confrontation with a long-forgotten realm within you. You see, the empath is born with a curious sensitivity, a receptivity that makes them feel the world as though the world were living inside them. They are tuned, often involuntarily, to the emotional undercurrents of others. This sensitivity is a gift, but it is also a burden, especially for the empath whose early life was shaped by a mother who herself was fragmented, or burdened, or emotionally absent, or too present in ways that overwhelmed rather than nourished. In such an environment, the child does not learn to feel themselves. They learn to feel others. Their emotional identity becomes porous, undefined, shaped not by their own inner voice, but by the emotional climate around them. And so, the empath becomes a vessel for parental ghosts, especially the mother's unhealed wounds. Many of you carry the mother's shadow without ever naming it. It appears as an inexplicable sense of responsibility for the emotions of others. It appears as guilt for setting boundaries that any healthy adult should have. It appears as a compulsion to rescue, to soothe, to make things right, even when the problem is not yours. And perhaps most painfully, it appears as a deep inner hunger, a longing for a form of love you cannot quite describe, because you never fully received it in its clean and nurturing form. The mother shadow is not the mother. It is the unintegrated residue of her fears, her disappointments, her unlived life, impressed onto the psyche of the child who was too sensitive to block them out. The empath absorbs these fragments like a sponge. They become attuned to the mother's moods before they even learn language. They learn to anticipate the emotional weather in the home. They become little guardians of harmony, protectors of stability, even at the cost of their own emerging selfhood. And so the empath grows up, yet remains psychically bound to the mother, not through love alone, but through unresolved emotional contracts, unconscious loyalties, and inherited patterns that silently dictate how they relate to others, and more importantly, how they relate to themselves When we attempt to heal the mother shadow, we are not trying to erase the past, nor are we accusing the mother of wrongdoing, for she too was shaped by her own mother. And her mother's mother, before that, no, we are attempting something far more sacred. We are untangling a knot in the lineage, freeing the voice that was silenced, allowing inner life to breathe again. To heal the mother shadow is to enter into dialogue with the unconscious, to meet the maternal energy not as it appeared externally, but as it exists internally as an archetype, as a complex, as a living psychological entity whose roots stretch back through generations. Some of you have dreams that reveal this shadow. Perhaps you dream of wandering through a house that was once your childhood home, but the walls are distorted, the rooms unfamiliar. Perhaps you dream of a woman whose face shifts, whose voice changes, who alternates between tenderness and coldness, or you dream of caring for a crying child who is not yours, yet feels strangely familiar. These dreams are invitations. They are the psyche's attempt to speak to you in its own language, telling you that something unfinished needs attention. The unconscious does not send these symbols to torment you, it sends them to awaken you. The mother shadow can lodge itself deep in the emotional body, manifesting as a persistent sense of unworthiness. You may find yourself believing you must earn love, prove your value, or offer emotional labor just to deserve a place in someone's heart. This is the old pattern of the child who had to perform emotionally to maintain connection with the mother. You were praised for being good, calm, helpful, intuitive, not necessarily for being yourself. And so the empath grows into an adult who excels at attuning to the needs of others, but often remains a stranger to their own inner landscape. Healing begins when you turn inward and encounter the maternal energy within you, not as a wounded child seeking love, but as an adult consciously reclaiming authority over your emotional life. This reclamation is not an act of rebellion, it is an act of liberation. It is the moment the empath realizes that their sensitivity does not have to be tethered to others' emotional chaos. Sensitivity becomes strength when it is rooted in self-awareness. But to reach this point, one must confront the mother shadow with courage, compassion, and a willingness to see what was once too painful to acknowledge. There is a moment in every inner journey when the archetype reveals itself. It might come unexpectedly, in silence, in meditation, or even in a mundane moment when you suddenly realize that the voice inside you, the critical one, the anxious one, the one that whispers, you must do more, be more, fix more, is not truly your voice. It belongs to the mother shadow. It is the mother's unmet fear speaking through the echo chamber of your psyche, asking you to carry burdens that were never yours to bear. When you recognize this voice, something shifts. You no longer merge unconsciously with it. You can observe it, question it, and begin to separate your identity from the complex. This separation is not cold or heartless. It is essential for individuation, for no one truly becomes themselves until they free their psyche from the unconscious bonds of origin. The empath who heals the mother shadow does not abandon the mother. They liberate themselves from the psychic entanglements that hindered their emotional freedom. There is an alchemical element to this process. The wounded inner child meets the archetypal mother within the psyche, and through conscious attention, a searching emerges a more integrated self, capable of holding both tenderness and strength. This is the birth of emotional sovereignty. It is what happens when you stop seeking maternal approval from the external world and begin cultivating the inner mother, the one who nurtures you with understanding, compassion, and boundaries. Some of you resist this healing because you fear what will rise from the depths. You fear anger that feels inappropriate, or grief that feels bottomless, or memories that feel disloyal to the woman who raised you. But the psyche has no interest in blaming. It has interest only in truth, and truth liberates. Let me tell you something. Few are willing to admit angels of intuition are born in the very places where nurturing was inconsistent. The empath's extraordinary capacity to feel is not an accident. It is a survival adaptation that later becomes a gift, but a gift distorted by survival becomes a burden. Healing the mother shadow allows you to keep the gift and release the burden. It allows sensitivity to become insight rather than anxiety, connection rather than enmeshment, compassion rather than depletion. If you listen closely to your emotional patterns, you will notice that many of them orbit around the same axis: the fear of abandonment, the fear of disappointing others, the fear of being too much or not enough. These fears are not random, they are echoes of childhood, where your emotional safety depended on maintaining a connection with the mother. The empath often learns to compress their own needs to maintain harmony. They learn that expressing their true self might cause withdrawal, disapproval, or emotional inconsistency. So they adapt, they shrink, they become small in order to stay loved. Healing begins when you allow yourself to expand again. When the empath begins to expand after a lifetime of contraction, the psyche reacts much like a dormant forest experiencing its first rainfall in years. Old roots awaken, buried seeds stir, emotions, long silenced, begin to speak in their original voices. This moment can feel disorienting, even frightening, because you are no longer navigating the world with the familiar emotional map you inherited from the mother shadow. You are feeling yourself directly, without filters, without inherited obligations, without the subtle psychological contract that once told you your feelings must remain secondary to the needs of others. And this awakening, though liberating, often arrives with a trembling uncertainty, as if the ground beneath you has shifted. But this trembling is the beginning of emotional freedom. It is the empathy no longer distorted by duty, It is the heart rediscovering its right to exist without permission. The empath, for the first time, feels the possibility of sovereignty, not dominance, not rejection of others, but inner autonomy, and this autonomy cannot emerge as long as the mother shadow commands the emotional world from the unconscious. Consider for a moment how the mother shadow forms. A child does not merely see the mother. The child experiences the mother as the world itself. She is warmth, nourishment, safety, unpredictability, and the first mirror through which the child learns who they are. When that mirror is cracked through emotional inconsistency, suppression, unmet needs, unspoken pain, the child's sense of identity becomes fragmented. They learn that love is conditional. They learn that emotions must be attuned outward rather than inward. And perhaps most painfully, they learn to mistrust their own inner signals. I have often said that the greatest tragedy in human development is not merely trauma, but the loss of the inner voice. For the empath shaped by the mother shadow, this voice does not disappear. It becomes buried under layers of hyper-attunement to the emotional worlds of others. The child learns, if I sense her moods, I remain safe. If I soothe her, I remain worthy. If I anticipate her needs, I will not be abandoned. And so the empath develops a powerful antenna that helps others feel seen and understood, but that antenna was never meant to replace the inner compass. To reclaim that inner compass is to challenge the mother shadow at its roots. During this process, many empaths experience dreams of separation dreams in which they stand at the threshold of a home that is both familiar and foreign. They may dream of crossing a river, leaving behind a woman who looks at them with both longing and sorrow. Others dream of returning to a childhood room, only to find it filled with objects that do not belong to them. As if the psyche is signaling, these burdens were never yours. Some dream of a mother who appears in two forms, one nurturing, one cold, symbolizing the dual nature of the mother complex, the archetype and the shadow, the giver and the taker, the source of life and the source of psychic entanglement. These dreams are not punishments, they are messages. They are invitations to see clearly what was once seen only through the haze of childhood dependence. The unconscious is attempting to separate the mother as archetype from the mother as shadow, so that the adult psyche may reclaim its rightful power. When the empath avoids this inner work, life often repeats the mother's emotional patterns through relationships, partners who are inconsistent, friends who demand emotional labor, employers who drain sensitivity. The empath is drawn to familiar dynamics, not because they are healthy, but because the psyche attempts to resolve the original wound by recreating it. This is what I have called the compulsion of fate. What remains unconscious returns again and again in life, not to punish, but to be integrated. A person with an unhealed mother shadow often finds themselves endlessly playing the role of the healer, the caretaker, the emotional anchor, even when it costs them their well-being. They mistake being needed for being loved. Healing the mother shadow means recognizing that love does not require self-abandonment. Let me speak plainly. Sensitivity without boundaries becomes self-destruction. The empath must understand that boundaries are not walls, but membranes, living protections that allow connection without loss of self. And boundaries are born from self-recognition. They arise naturally, not from anger or resentment, but from clarity. You cannot set a boundary when you do not know who you are. And you cannot know who you are when the mother shadow speaks louder than your own voice. To help you understand this transition, imagine standing in a room filled with echoes. Some echoes belong to you, others belong to your mother, your ancestors, or the old emotional contracts of childhood. When you heal the mother shadow, you begin to separate these echoes, not with violence, but with discernment. You recognize this fear is hers, not mine. This guilt is inherited, not earned. This expectation was placed upon me, but it does not define me. And with each recognition, a piece of your emotional field returns to you. This inner sorting is not an intellectual process. It is deeply experiential. Some of you may feel waves of grief as you realize how much of your life was shaped by inherited emotional patterns. Others may feel anger rising like a storm, anger that you feared to express because it felt forbidden. Still others may feel profound relief, as if a weight you carried for decades has finally been placed gently on the ground. These emotions are sacred. They are the psyche's way of reorganizing itself, releasing the old burdens so that the true self can emerge. I want you to understand something essential. Healing the mother shadow does not diminish the mother. It protects the sacred maternal archetype from distortion. It frees the mother within you. And yes, each of you carries a mother within. You carry her as instinct, as intuition, as the capacity to nurture your own emotional life. But when the shadow interferes, nurturing becomes sacrifice. Intuition becomes anxiety, and care becomes overextension. The empath must learn to mother themselves, not with indulgence, but with understanding, not with self-pity, but with self-compassion, and not with emotional dependency, but with inner steadiness. This inner mother is the antidote to the mother shadow. She is patient, she is clear, she listens not only to others but to you. She says, you may rest even when the old conditioning demands constant giving. She says, your feelings matter. Even when childhood taught you the opposite, she says, you are allowed to disappoint others because she understands that authenticity is worth more than compliance. The moment the inner mother awakens, the empath feels a subtle shift. It may come as a sudden sense of calm in a moment when you once would have panicked. It may come as the ability to say no without trembling. It may come as a new awareness that your worth does not increase or decrease based on how much emotional labor you provide. But perhaps the most profound shift comes in solitude. For the empath with an unhealed mother shadow, solitude is often tinged with emptiness or longing, as if still waiting for a presence that never fully arrived. But once healing begins, solitude becomes nourishing, peaceful, and alive. It becomes a space where you meet yourself without fear. Let me offer you a symbol that may guide this journey, the empty chair. In many therapeutic traditions, the empty chair is used to converse with the unseen and internalized parent, an archetype, a disowned aspect of the self. I want you to imagine placing the mother's shadow in that chair, not the mother as a human being, but the shadow, the guilt, the responsibility, the inherited emotional burden. Look at it without judgment. Recognize its origins, understand its purpose, and then, with quiet authority, tell it, your time as the ruler of my emotional life has ended. This is not an act of rebellion, but an act of individuation. It is not a rejection of the mother, but a reclamation of yourself. As you say these words, in the inner world, something ancient stirs. You may sense a release in your chest, or a lightness behind your eyes, or a deep exhale rising from your unconscious depths. The psyche responds when spoken to with clarity. It responds when you assert your adult autonomy. It responds when you step into your rightful place as the sovereign of your own emotional world. And this sovereignty is not cold or detached. It is rooted, grounded, compassionate, expansive. Once this inner authority begins to stabilize, the empath discovers something remarkable. Their sensitivity becomes clearer, sharper, and more intuitive, because it is no longer hijacked by the mother shadow. It becomes an instrument of insight rather than a mechanism of survival. You are no longer feeling others in order to predict danger. You are feeling them from a grounded center. You are no longer reacting, you are perceiving. You are no longer drowning in emotional currents. You are navigating them with inner stability. As the healing unfolds, the empath begins to encounter a new kind of emotional clarity, one that feels almost unfamiliar, as if a dense fog is lifting from the inner landscape. For many, this clarity initially feels unsettling. You may notice that you are no longer overwhelmed by the emotional atmospheres of others. You may find yourself unwilling to engage in the roles you once performed automatically. The peacemaker, the emotional sponge, the silent comforter who absorbs tension to keep the room calm. What was once unconscious obligation now feels like a choice, and this simple shift changes everything. You see, the empath, shaped by the mother shadow, often lives with an internalized mandate: I must hold the emotional world together. This mandate does not arise from arrogance or self-importance. It arises from the childhood experience of believing that your emotional presence was necessary for stability. But as healing deepens, the empath begins to realize that this mandate was never theirs to begin with. It was inherited, it was placed upon you long before you had the capacity to question it. The truth is simpler and far more liberating. You exist not to hold others together, but to inhabit your own life fully. This realization often brings a wave of grief. The empath may grieve the childhood they never had, the one where they could simply be without performing emotional labor. They may grieve the innocence lost to premature responsibility. They may grieve the self that was shaped more by survival than by authentic desire. But grief, in this sacred context, is not destructive. It is purifying. It washes the psyche clean of illusions. It creates space for something new to grow. I want to speak to you about the symbolic mother in myth, for myth always tells the truth that daylight cannot bear. In myth, the mother is often depicted in dual forms, the nurturing goddess and the devouring mother. The nurturing mother feeds the soul, gives life, fosters growth. The devouring mother consumes, binds, overwhelms, or keeps the child too close, preventing individuation. This duality exists within the collective unconscious because it reflects a fundamental psychological truth. The mother archetype contains both light and shadow. And when the shadow aspect dominates, the child's psyche becomes entangled in patterns of emotional enmeshment. The empath's sensitivity makes them especially vulnerable to this entanglement. They feel the mother's fears, her disappointments, her anxieties, as if these emotions were their own. They absorb the energy of the devouring mother archetype, not because the mother intended harm, but because the empath's emotional permeability has no boundaries in childhood. The psyche, still forming, does not know how to differentiate between what belongs to the self and what belongs to the other. Healing the mother shadow means making this differentiation at last. Picture, if you will, a child walking through a forest with a lantern. The lantern represents the child's emerging sense of self, while the forest represents the emotional world of the mother. If the forest is too dense, the lantern flickers. If the forest is too dark, the child cannot see their own path. But as the child grows and tends the flame of the lantern, protecting it, feeding it, believing in its light, the forest changes. What was once overwhelming becomes navigable. What was once confusing becomes meaningful. Eventually, the child realizes that they carry their own source of illumination, and the forest ceases to dominate them. This is what healing the mother shadow feels like. It is the discovery that your inner flame exists independently of the emotional forest you were born into. As the empath strengthens this inner flame, a new psychological posture emerges, one rooted in discernment. Discernment is not detachment, it is clarity of feeling. It allows the empath to sense the emotional life of others without merging with it. It allows them to care without collapsing into caretaking. It allows them to say, I understand your pain, but it is not mine to carry. This sentence, simple, yet profound, marks a turning point in the empath's journey. For the first time, emotion becomes information rather than obligation. Sensitivity becomes wisdom rather than self-sacrifice. And empathy becomes a gift rather than a wound. But before this clarity stabilizes, the mother shadow will often rise in one final attempt to reclaim its hold. You may experience moments of guilt more intense than before, as if an invisible force pulls you back into old patterns. You may hear the old inner voice whisper, "You are selfish. You are abandoning someone who needs you. Or you must not change." These whispers are not truth. They are remnants of the old emotional contract. They are echoes of the psychic bond that once dictated your behavior, and these echoes grow loudest when you are closest to freedom. Do not fear these moments. They are signs of progress. They are the psyche shedding its old skin. They are the final shadows cast by a structure that is collapsing. The inner world often becomes most turbulent just before it becomes clear. If you pay attention during these moments, you will notice something subtle. The voice of the mother shadow feels old, rigid, automated. It does not respond to your present reality. It simply repeats patterns from the past. This is the key to overcoming it. Once you recognize the voice as a pattern rather than a truth, its power diminishes. The ego no longer reacts reflexively. The unconscious no longer leaks into your emotional decisions. You begin to choose consciously. You begin to speak with your own voice. This emergence of the true voice is one of the most transformative phases of healing. Many empaths have never truly heard themselves speak from the core. Their words, for most of their lives, were shaped by the need not to disturb others. Their tone was softened, their opinions carefully edited, their desires disguised behind the needs of others. But when the voice of the mother shadow recedes, the authentic voice rises. It is clear, steady, grounded, not loud, not aggressive. It does not need to prove anything. It simply exists. And with this voice comes a new kind of strength, not the strength of rigidity, but the strength of rootedness. A tree does not shout to prove its existence. Its presence is its power. Likewise, the empath who has healed the mother shadow no longer needs to perform emotional roles. They stand firmly in themselves. They no longer equate love with emotional labor. They no longer confuse peace with self-erasure. They no longer accept relationships that mirror the unhealthy dynamics of their childhood. One of the most profound transformations occurs in the realm of romantic relationships. The empath, who once attracted partners who depended heavily on their emotional presence, now begins to attract individuals who respect emotional boundaries, who bring their own stability, who do not seek to be rescued or mothered. This shift is not magic, it is psychological law. We attract from the level of our unconscious. When the mother shadow dominates, we attract unfinished business. When the mother shadow heals, we attract resonance instead of repetition. In this transformation, the empath also begins to relate differently to the mother in real life if she is still present. There may be moments of discomfort as new boundaries are established. The mother may feel unsettled by the empath's newfound independence, but this is where compassion must guide the healing. The mother is not the enemy. She is another human being shaped by her own mother shadow. And when you heal yourself, you do not only heal your lineage forward, you heal it backward. You become, in the psychological sense, the ancestor your family never had. This is the hidden beauty of empathic healing. It becomes a sacred act of generational liberation. If your mother is no longer alive, or if contact is impossible, the healing still unfolds within you. The psyche does not require the physical presence of the mother to reorganize the maternal archetype. The work is internal. The transformation is symbolic. The healing takes place in the inner field where the complex lives, and once that transformation occurs, the emotional patterns that once governed your life lose their power. Let me describe what this freedom feels like, so you may recognize it when it arrives. It feels like coming home to yourself after being away for decades. It feels like breathing without constriction. It feels like having space inside you where before there was only tension. It feels like walking through the world with an inner parent, a wise, steady presence who supports you from within. It feels like no longer needing to earn the right to exist, and perhaps for the first time, you begin to feel a profound truth. You are allowed to be emotionally free. As emotional freedom begins to take root within the empath, the psyche undergoes a silent rearrangement, subtle at first, then unmistakable. It's as if the furniture of your inner home, long pushed against the walls to make space for others, slowly returns to its rightful position. The rooms that were once crowded with inherited voices, ancestral fears, and old emotional contracts begin to open. Light enters places that have not felt warmth in years. You do not force this change. It unfolds naturally, like dawn, spreading across a dark landscape. You simply find yourself inhabiting your life differently. For perhaps the first time, you begin to sense the mother archetype not as a shadow looming over your emotional world, but as an inner presence that stabilizes, supports, and nourishes your growth. This is what happens when the archetype integrates. The devouring mother gives way to the nurturing mother, not because the external relationship has changed, but because the psychic relationship has healed. The inner mother becomes what she was always meant to be, a source of intuition, creativity, self-trust, and emotional grounding. With this integration, your sensitivity deepens in a new way. It becomes precise. It becomes intuitive rather than anxious. It feels like a river that finally returns to its natural course after years of being dammed. You no longer track every shift in another person's mood. Instead, you track the subtle movements of your own inner landscape. You become intimate with your own needs. you begin to recognize desire not as something shameful or self-indulgent, but as the birthplace of authenticity. This is the moment when the empath begins to understand the true nature of boundaries not as acts of separation, but as acts of self-preservation and clarity. Boundaries are not punishments. They are declarations of where your responsibility ends and where another's begins. They are the lines that protect intimacy from enmeshment. And when you draw these boundaries from a place of emotional freedom, they do not feel like walls. They feel like the contours of your soul, the mother shadow. Once the silent puppeteer of your emotional life begins to dissolve, not with drama, not with conflict. It dissolves the moment you realize you no longer need its protection. The shadow was always an adaptation or strategy, a survival code written in the nervous system of a child. And when the adult psyche finally gains the tools to stand in its own authority, that survival code becomes obsolete. There is often one final phase in this transformation, an internal reconciliation. You may feel called to revisit memories you once avoided, not to relive them, but to reinterpret them from the vantage point of your grown self. You may see moments from childhood with new eyes, recognizing how much you absorbed, how deeply you felt, how silently you cared. And yet, you also see something else. You were not weak, you were not overly emotional, you were not fragile, you were adaptive, you were intuitive, you were surviving with a level of emotional intelligence far beyond your years. And now, with your adult consciousness awakened, you can give that child what they never had: validation without condition, love without expectation, presence without fear. Many empaths experience un moment qui est, almost sacred, where they feel themselves holding their younger self in an inner embrace. This is not imagination. It is psychological truth expressed symbolically. The psyche heals through symbol, through image, through felt experience. When you meet your inner child, you are meeting the part of you that was once left waiting for a mother who could not fully arrive. And in that meeting, something ancient resolves. The waiting ends. The inner timetable of longing dissolves. The emotional clock resets to the present moment. This reunion gives rise to what I call the inner sanctuary. This sanctuary is not a place you go. It is a place that comes alive within you. It is characterized by three sensations: safety, spaciousness, and clarity. When you are in your sanctuary, your sensitivity feels grounded. Your emotions flow freely, but do not overwhelm you. Your intuition speaks with a calm authority. You no longer lose yourself in others. You no longer shrink to fit emotional spaces that do not honor you. You no longer mistake empathy for self-sacrifice. The more time you spend in this inner sanctuary, the more your external world transforms. You begin to attract people who honor your emotional autonomy. You gravitate toward environments where your sensitivity is a strength, not a liability. You choose relationships based not on unconscious obligation, but on conscious resonance, and most importantly, you begin to experience yourself as whole, not because external circumstances validate your wholeness, but because your inner structure has reorganized itself into alignment. This wholeness brings forth a new kind of power, a soft power, a keyed power, a grounded power. It is not the power of dominance or control. It is the power of self-possession. It is the power that comes from no longer negotiating your worth. When the empath reaches this stage, they often feel a sense of inevitability, as if this version of themselves was always waiting beneath the layers of adaptation. And this is the truth. Emotional freedom is not something you learn, it is something you uncover. It was always there, beneath the mother shadow. Your sensitivity was never the problem. Your emotional intensity was never a flaw. Your depth was never the issue. The only obstacle was the distortion created by an archetypal wound passed down through generations. Once that wound begins to heal, your natural self emerges with a clarity that feels both ancient and new. Let me speak now about the symbolic meaning of freedom. Emotional freedom does not mean detachment from others. It does not mean living without responsibility or connection. It means living in alignment with your authentic emotional truth. It means responding to others from choice rather than compulsion. It means loving without losing yourself. It means caring without collapsing into someone else's pain. It means recognizing that your emotional life belongs to you and always has. This freedom also awakens a deep sense of compassion for the mother herself, for when you see her not through the eyes of the wounded child, but through the eyes of the healed adult, you understand the fullness of her humanity. You see her limitations without resentment. You see her suffering without carrying it. You see her story without merging with it. This is the highest form of forgiveness, not pity, not obligation, but a clear-hearted recognition that both of you were shaped by forces far older than either of you understood. And in this clarity, something beautiful happens. The empath becomes the bridge between generations. You become the point where the ancestral pattern ends. You become the one who breaks the chain. But more importantly, you become the one who transforms the chain into something new, a lineage of consciousness rather than repetition. You see, every empath who heals the mother shadow is not simply healing personal wounds. You are altering the psychic blueprint of your lineage. You are preventing the shadow from being passed onward. You are becoming a new archetypal figure, the conscious child, the one who returns light to the mother's lineage through awareness, through courage, through the willingness to face what others could not. The journey does not end with healing, it begins there. Once the mother shadow dissolves, you regain access to the full spectrum of your emotional and intuitive intelligence. You become capable of profound creativity, deep relationships, and authentic self-expression. You become sensitive not because you must be, but because you are. And sensitivity, when owned, becomes one of the most powerful psychic instruments available to human beings. The empath, who has healed the mother shadow, walks through the world differently. There is no longer a frantic search for belonging. There is no longer a fear of abandonment. There is no longer a compulsion to rescue or mend others. Instead, there is a quiet confidence, a grounded presence, a calm clarity that radiates from within. You begin to inhabit yourself fully, your body, your emotions, your intuition, your voice, and at last, you feel the truth of the central insight. Emotional freedom begins the moment you stop carrying what was never yours. This freedom is not a destination, it is a way of being. It is the soft but steady flame of self-awareness. It is the return to the self after years of wandering through the emotional landscapes of others. It is the moment the heart finally whispers, "This is mine," and you listen. My friends, when the empath heals the mother shadow, they do more than free themselves. They free the archetype, they free the lineage, they free the future. And that is why emotional freedom does not merely begin, it multiplies, radiates, and ripples through every relationship, every choice, every breath that follows. You become not just healed, but whole, not just aware, but awakened, not just sensitive, but sovereign. This is your inheritance. This is your liberation. This is your beginning.